So in the aftermath of 6 hostages being murdered in cold blood by Hamas, there were protests in parts of Israel, large protests, where they were not protesting Hamas, protesting the Israeli government. Now, we all have concerns, differences of opinions with the Israeli government on how the war should be conducted. But what it seemed to be suggesting was that it was somehow the fault of the government, that there was some kind of totally acceptable deal on the table. But there wasn't a deal on the table with Hamas. They weren't coming to the table. And by the way, even if they were, that doesn't mean Israel should accept any and all deals. The last deal they did to return one hostage with Gilad Shalit, well, not the last one, but one of the previous ones they did, ended up leading to Yahya Sinwar being released, who was the chief architect of October 7th. These things are not simple. And as Melanie Phillips described, the suicidal stupidity of protesting and showing division inside of Israel at a time like this, at a time of war, is so unhealthy. Have we not forgotten that it was our internal divisions which played a role in keeping our eye off the ball prior to October 7th? I want to show you the words of Douglas Murray being asked about this very issue. He's in conversation with Senator Tom Cotton at the Republican Jewish Coalition. Have a watch.
I have to say it was remarkable to me to see after Hamas executed in cold blood 6 hostages last weekend, executing them because Israeli troops were closing in on them, that the reaction you saw across so much of at least large cities in Israel were protests in the streets against the prime minister. You had the Histadrut shutting down the nation in a general strike before it was ordered to stop by court. So many people speaking out against Prime Minister Netanyahu as if he was the one who had executed these hostages, or he was the one who was holding them hostage himself. What do you think accounts for that on the Israeli left?
Well, I mean, this is something which I find profoundly disturbing. I have done for many months. There are people inside Israel and out who behave as if the hostages are in Benjamin Netanyahu's basement. It's quite appalling. And after the murders last week, the world media and politicians behaved as if Benjamin Netanyahu had killed them. I think one of the only explanations for this is we in the West are so far away from reality today. We are so far away from understanding the reality of evil. Hannah Arendt used this famous, awful phrase, the banality of evil, and she was completely wrong. Evil is a force that when you see it, you will never forget it. But Americans don't see evil like Israel saw on the 7th. When you do polls of young Americans asking if they'd fight for their country, or the figures are terrible, but they have no concept of ever needing to do that. They have no threat from Canada, yet. And it's the same in Europe. Most of Western Europe, less now in Eastern Europe since the Ukraine war. But the idea of what you're actually dealing with Hamas is just a different world than the world that somebody buying their morning frappuccino in a Starbucks can imagine. And this is one of the things that has startled me in the last 11 months, is one thing in particular has haunted me. Many things have, but one thing I can't get out of my head is the sheer lack of empathy. The sheer lack of empathy for the Israeli people. I think so often of the survivors of the Nova Party who I've spent a lot of time with, and I wonder so often why do their contemporaries in America, who would love to, who'd go to a dance, rave, or whatever, why don't they all think, God, that could have been me? Why when the survivors of the Nova Festival come to New York, do they have to face down people in the streets outside hating them? Israelis are the only people in the world who, when they're attacked, then get attacked again. And the sheer lack of empathy for the situation Israel is in is just startling to me. And it's unforgivable for the people who've indulged in it. You know, remember, we've had in recent years, believe all women. And it turns out that doesn't apply if the women who are raped are Jewish. And we had the world, when I covered the conflict in northern Nigeria some years ago, when the northern Nigerians, Chibok schoolgirls, 300 of them were stolen from their village in northern Nigeria. Michelle Obama and every influencer on Instagram held up the rather futile, but still nice, hashtag bring back our girls. Where were these people when the girls were Jewish? And the sheer lack of empathy for the situation they're in just startles me.
It's remarkable how Douglas is able to just see things so clearly. Or rather, it's remarkable that so much of the commentariat, the media, the political class aren't able to see things clearly, aren't able to see this clear and open bias. Just want to pick up on two things he said. First of all, the fact that the world, not only when Israel experiences, a tragedy, not only is there a lack of sympathy, but they deny it, or they ignore it, or even worse, blame Israel for it. I remember learning once about there's a debate in the Talmud about how Job, Eov, who was known as a story in the Bible where he goes through immense suffering, undeservedly, but God puts him through immense suffering, sort of like as a test. And there's a debate in the Talmud about how he died, how he passed away, and there's various different opinions. And one opinion says he never actually existed. He's just it's just a moral story, but he didn't actually exist in real life. And apparently, I learned that a rabbi of the 20th century commented on that opinion and said, that opinion, that's what killed him. In other words, the denial of suffering, the invalidation, the gaslighting, saying that your suffering didn't even happen, is as cruel as the suffering itself. Not to feel seen, heard when you've gone through something. It's psychologically tormenting. We don't have denial for any other great atrocity, yet we have Holocaust denial. And once again, we have a new form of denial as well. October 7th denial. And it really is shocking, and it is so clearly unique to the Jews. And then there's this point that he talks about the protests in Israel at the start, as if it's all in Netanyahu's hands. We can have disagreements on how the war should be conducted, but we should be absolutely clear that the moral onus lies with Hamas. Part of the problem with this thinking that's so hostile to Israel and to Netanyahu. And by the way, I have to keep stressing, I don't agree with every part of the war strategy. I feel that, I'm concerned about tolerating this threat on the northern border right now and not going harder and faster. I'm concerned about letting so many Israeli soldiers' lives be put on the line to be so surgical in a way when you're dealing with a population that is overwhelmingly supportive, not just hostile to Israel, but supportive of October 7th. But nonetheless, I accept that I don't know all the details. I know that we have to be fully behind Israel and the decisions they make at this time, and that unity is our greatest strength. But I find it so bizarre, alarming, how there can be people who seem to live in this false reality where it's all so straightforward. And if Netanyahu wasn't so screwed up, then he would find a way to get those hostages. It's just ignoring reality. It's wanting it to be that simple, wanting it to be that it's just Netanyahu. He's just a warmonger. He just wants to stay in power. I often think, it's in his interest politically to return all the hostages. Even if he'd have to leave office, he'd leave office having secured some kind of military victory in the end. You'd have to have such a high level of evil to want to cynically keep everything going for as long as possible just so you can stay in power alone. I personally don't buy that. He may be wanting to do things in a way that might not be as fast as others might want. But I don't think that's about cynicism. But either way, this notion that Netanyahu could have solved the situation with the hostages, it's not true. Hamas weren't coming to the table. As he said in a recent press conference, he was constantly agreeing to American deals. The bridging proposal, all these plans, the Americans said so themselves. And I have to keep stressing as well, even if there was a deal on the table, I'm not so sure that Israel should necessarily agree to it. If it's going to cost more Israeli lives in the longer term, Jewish morality certainly doesn't permit that. We want to get all the hostages. I pray for them every single day. It's the first thing on my lips in prayer. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't hold all of Israel hostage, right? If you're going to do things which will pave the way for more hostages in the future, to incentivize people to take hostages, to release murderers and terrorists, which could lead to more, it's not straightforward. And this is the thing that bothers me so much about these kind of people that think like this. They think it's all just so straightforward and simple. It's just Netanyahu who's the problem. Or, just Israel could make a few more concessions and then we'd have peace. It's just the Arabs are just a bit aggrieved because, we were so bad to them in 1948. And if we just kind of show a bit more compassion towards them, then everything will be fine. It's that kind of thinking as well, this childish thinking of living in a fantasy land where you look at the world as you want it to be rather than as it actually is. The world as it actually is says that in 2005, we tried that. We left, we said, go ahead, take all our infrastructure, take this beautiful beachside resort and make a success of it. And we got a terror state, death cult, rockets, terrorism, culminating in October 7th. It's not about a genuine grievance. It's about a hateful jihadist ideology that cannot make space for the Jews and for Israel. And the same is true here. This is not about, Netanyahu, the warmonger. This is about Hamas and their evil ways. And so therefore, it is moral perversion. It is also so strategically flawed and wrong for Israel to be turning in on themselves right now. And so Douglas, as always, is absolutely right about this. But remember this doesn't represent most Israelis. Most people in Israel understand that this kind of divisiveness and this kind of finger pointing that is so futile and so incorrect gets you nowhere and is not constructive and simply isn't true. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.